to show you something that someone sent to me a few years ago. And this is concerning the stuff that I talk about. And the stuff I talk about is called territorial jurisdiction. Territorial jurisdiction was discovered by an attorney named Ed Rivera. He is a bar attorney. And when he found out territorial jurisdiction, he started using it in court to win his cases. And the story goes that he was winning every single one of his cases to the point that they didn't take his bar card because he hadn't done anything wrong, but they wouldn't hear any case he brought to court anymore. So this is something a friend had sent me, and I don't know if she found it, if someone else found it, if someone found it and sent it to her, etc. But this is what she sent me to look at. And she's friends with Ed Rivera, so, or friends with a friend of Ed Rivera or something like that. And so she sent me this to look at. Now this, I want you to look, I Googled DOJ, CRM, 666. And what comes up is proof of territorial jurisdiction from www.justice.gov. So what is territorial jurisdiction? Before we get into it, you should know what it is. So I've been doing some videos over this report put out by the federal government. I've been talking about this report a lot, and I share it in almost every single one of my videos. This report can be difficult to find. I've noticed that sometimes when I post it on a website, it'll get taken down, like a library website. But I keep posting them on archive.org. It's easy to post stuff there, and I keep them up there. This is a part 1 in 1956. There's a part 2 in 1957. So what we have here is a report. This is done by a committee put together by Eisenhower during his administration in the 50s. Now check out the name. It's called Report of the Interdepartmental Committee for the Study of Jurisdiction over Federal Areas within the States. If you can hear some crunching, that's my dog eating a snack. Okay, jurisdiction over federal areas within the states. And what this report says is that the federal government has always been and still really is confined to federal lands that were annexed to it by the states during the time that the states became part of the Union. Okay, so we also have the Constitution, which basically says the exact same thing. And Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever. Okay, so this is exclusive legislative jurisdiction. That's what that means. They mean exercise exclusive legislation and exclusive legislative jurisdiction are the same thing. So it's jurisdiction or types of jurisdictions over this district, which is the seat of government called Washington, D.C., and like authority over all places purchased. The federal government has not purchased all places. It has simply, it doesn't have exclusive jurisdiction over all places because it hasn't purchased all those places, for one. And two, some of it has just acquired, and it doesn't have exclusive legislative jurisdiction over places that it didn't purchase, but it has control over. That's what I'm trying to say. We also have a map. Okay, now I found these maps on nationalatlas.gov. I went back to get some more of these maps, like I was going to download one for every state. And when I went here, it said that the website had expired. Okay, I don't know what that means or if it had an expiration date from the beginning or what, but it has expired and you can't get back on there now. And there's, of course, as many of you know, there's an inventory report. Sometimes 2 clicks just isn't enough. Well, the inventory report here, which you can see here, here it is. It opened up in my Constitution paper. Inventory report on jurisdictional status of federal areas within the states from 1962, where they have, of course, they have a map and their key codes. They have a jurisdiction code with the types of jurisdiction and what each jurisdictional code means. And then they have a form that they filled out and they filed. And they update these every so often. This one's from 1962. It expired in 1963. I talk about this all the time. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because I've spent so much time on it in other videos. I want to get to this one because there's still a lot of people out there who they are not understanding this and they're not accepting it. So let's click. This is justice.gov. This is a government website. It's got the flag up here in the left corner showing that it's an official government website of the United States government. And then here is your proof of territorial jurisdiction. So it's proof that the federal government has jurisdiction, but you have to understand that it has jurisdiction on its own lands. Okay? Now that's in the Eisenhower report, report 1 and 2. That's on the, it's in the Constitution. It's in the inventory report. It's in the various case laws. It's on the nationalatlas.gov website where it tells you the federal areas, even though the website's not up anymore. The federal areas, and it shows you. Usually military reservations are the place where they have exclusive jurisdiction because these are the places they were supposed to build forts on. Okay, so there's, let's see, I think there's one other thing. Various laws that they write, it's in them, but you have to understand exactly what it's talking about. Okay, state means a state or territory or possession of the United States. Well, let's look at the word state because in the time that Lincoln was president, he created a new state. He created new states. They're called legal states. So when they say the states, are they talking about the independent state or some new legal state created by Lincoln? You know, which is it? I have some of those Lincoln papers. I'll have to find them. This recording that I'm using, this app doesn't have a pause button. But let's look here. Title 4, Chapter 4, Section 124. The zip code. The term enhanced zip code, of course, that just means the zip plus the extra numbers. And then it talks about the taxing jurisdiction. So when you register your property with the legal state, and in Texas it's called, quote, state of Texas, end quote. That's the legal state. It was an usurpation of power because the federal government didn't have the right to create the legal state, but they did it by force. So they forced those states that were ceding from the Union and re-acknowledging the Articles of Confederation. They placed the military in there, and the military has no law enforcement power. The military can't do anything. The Coast Guard has a law enforcement power. The Coast Guard does, and the military doesn't. And I was talking to a Coast Guard commissioned officer a couple weeks ago, maybe it was a month ago, and I asked him, I said, hey, is this child trafficking thing, is this as bad as they say it is? And he said, oh no, it's way, way worse. And I said, really? And he says, yes, it's bad. So I was kind of taken aback by that, because you know how people make a big deal out of things that are really kind of small. But he said, no, it's really, really bad. And I asked him, I said, so what is the Coast Guard doing in international waters? I thought they were the Coast Guard. And he said, oh yeah, because they're over in like the coast of Bahrain and some other places, the Gulf of Mexico or something, out in international waters making arrests. And I said, how are they doing that if they're supposed to be guarding the coast? And he said, because the Coast Guard has law enforcement powers, they can make arrests, whereas the Navy does not. The Navy cannot make arrests. So if the Navy cannot make arrests, the Coast Guard will go to where the Navy is. When the Navy finds criminals out in the water, they'll call the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard will come out and arrest them. But that was very difficult. So now they put Coast Guard, like a Coast Guard officer on the Navy ships so that when the Navy finds criminals, the Coast Guard can arrest them. So the military that was instituted into the lands by Lincoln, into the states, were being misused. Lincoln also used the military to take over the railroads, and he used now the military-controlled railroads, which was really government-controlled railroads, to allow Rockefeller to ship his products across the United States for like very little money. And shipping ate up a lot of costs in those days. So he was able to ship his products, which meant that he could ship more products and people could buy more products across the United States. And then after that, he was able to buy the refineries in, I think, Ohio. And he became the wealthiest man, I think, in the world. It said, maybe the book said America, or the first American millionaire, maybe both. Maybe he was the first American millionaire because he was also the first world millionaire. I'd have to double check on that to make sure. But the military was used because Lincoln created this legal state. And he created this legal state by force, using the military and its power against the people that they have an oath to uphold and defend, because that's what's in the Constitution. So these taxing jurisdictions, okay? Now remember, we're looking at something called Territorial jurisdiction. Proof of territorial jurisdiction. Okay, so territorial jurisdiction includes taxing jurisdiction. Taxing, federal taxes were always intended to be on the federal lands. And I have a neat little paper on that too. I'll bring that up in a minute. But if you look at the current Title 26 of the IRS, it references you back to the 1980 something code. Well, that one references you back to the 1950 something code, and that one references you back to the 1939 code. So the 1939 code was made law. The rest of them were never passed into law. They just wrote them and then referenced the previous and referenced the previous and referenced the previous back to 1939. But the thing about the 1939 code was that it was, on its face, it was written that it was the taxing of the federal income of the federal people on the federal lands. Okay, the public servants were the ones who paid taxes, federal taxes. It makes sense if you can undo in your mind the brainwashing that's happened for the last 100 years or so, almost 100 years. You can then understand that federal taxes would be on federal income. Okay, so taxing jurisdiction means any of the several states, the District of Columbia, or any territory or possession of the United States, any municipality. Now see, when it says United States, it's kind of using a little trick here, because the United States are the federal lands. And it says that in all these things that I show you, it tells you that. And sometimes you have to read between the lines. You can't just take things at face value because they're not written at face value. Okay, a municipality is a city. Okay, and a district, that's the District of Columbia, assessment jurisdiction, or any other political subdivision within the territorial limits of the United States, with the authority to impose a tax, charge, or fee. Authority is a big deal. Because if you don't have the authority to do it, then it's just being done by contract or consent. And who's doing this? It's a corporation. The corporations are taxing us because the government can't tax anything outside its lands. So it institutes corporations, and it allows the corporations to tax you. But the corporations have no authority to tax you. So what do? The federal government comes up with federal forms, or these corporations comes up with forms, and they ask the federal government to assign it a federal government OMB number. That's Office of Management and Budget. They ask the government to put the form through the process and assign it a number, meaning that it was approved. These forms are also called solicitations or advertisements. So then these forms are once approved and given an OMB number, the corporations are allowed to use them and pass them off as being a federal form. And since they're advertisements, they can lie and they can say, you have to fill this form out. You have to do it. You have to. It's the law. I mean, we hear that over and over and over again. But when you ask them, what's your authority? They come after you. If you ask them to show me where your authority is, show me a copy of your charter, show me a copy of your a certificate of incorporation. Show me where your jurisdiction is. Show me where you have jurisdiction. They can't show you it because they don't have it. Because the people you're paying taxes to is not the government. It's a corporation created by the government, which has no authority. That's why they have to get you to sign papers. Because they're doing it off the federal lands. Okay, so even criminals, when they go through the justice system, the CRM here tells them that they're allowing themselves to be put through a court, a federal court, without the federal court actually having authority to do it. And that's why they have to get you to sign papers, right? They have to get you to sign the papers. You have to sign here. Yeah, I have to sign there in order to get you, to allow you to do bad things to me. Here's the 1939 Tax Act. Now remember, Title 26, I've told you, is not a law. It's never been passed into law. So they say, well, the 1980 whatever reorganization plan, okay, who cares? I don't care. It's a reorganization plan. It doesn't mean anything. Oh, but the 1959, okay, who does that apply to? Well, the 1939 was made a law. Okay, well, who does it apply to? It's the public. The public is not you. The public is not the free people. The public, it's talking about the people who work for the government. Where's the proof of that? How am I telling you this? An act relating to the taxation of the compensation of public officers and employees. Who are public officers and employees? That's in the 1939 code. Okay, public officers and employees may also mean the officers and employees of the corporations instituted by the federal government to turn around and make people pay taxes that they don't actually have to pay and don't owe. The legal state is part of the legal state. These corporations are part of the legal state. It's for business purposes. Legal, if you go back to Chief Justice Marshall, this was back, I think, before the Civil War. He had a case opinion that he wrote, and he said in it that basically anything legal is a fiction. It's artificial, and it's for people acting as fictions or acting artificially. And I've had some people say different things about we have to have a fiction to work in this system. Okay, I understand you have to have a fiction to work in this system, but you don't have to work in this system because there's no requirement for anyone to register their business with the federal government or even the state. Historically, okay, if anybody has proof that someone has to register their business with the lawful state, not the legal state created by them, not state of Texas, not state of Ohio, not state of whatever, the legal state of. Now, there's different ways of writing state of. You can say in general, like before the legal state was created, you could say state of Ohio or state of Kansas or state of California and not be talking about the legal state. You could just be talking in general about the state, Ohio or Kansas or California. But when the federal government talks about the state, it's talking about the legal state that it created. State of California, state of Texas, state of Oklahoma. So there's a difference between the legal state that Lincoln created and just the state of that we speak of in generally. Okay, there has been a trend to treat certain jurisdictional facts that do not bear on guilt, mens rea or actus reus, as non-elements of the offense. So it's saying there's a trend to act like jurisdiction is not an element of the defense. But jurisdiction is an element of the defense, because for the federal government to prosecute someone for a federal crime, it can't be some idea they created. It can't be based on, well, you didn't do this certain thing, so we're going to, or you did do this certain thing, so we're going to punish you in a federal court because it's a federal crime. It has to have been done on federal lands. Okay? So there are federal lands and there are non-federal lands. Here's the federal lands, and they don't even have the right to prosecute for a crime on all of these lands. Department of Defense for sure, because that's in the Constitution. However, these other Bureau of Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife Service, those come under different jurisdictions. Remember, in the inventory report, we talked about the different jurisdictions. Okay, so Code 1, Jurisdictional Code 1, exclusive legislative jurisdiction would be the blue, Department of Defense. These are the Constitution jurisdiction areas where they're allowed to build forts and carry out certain activities on those forts. Okay. And then you have, let's say, Bureau of Reclamation, which would be purple, and I really don't see purple in Texas. And this is a recent map. This is not like based on ancient land markings and stuff, land posts. So Bureau of Reclamation would be one of these other jurisdictions where the government has less and less and less power. Okay. So when it says state, I have a whole bunch of these pictures, screenshots that I took of their laws, so that I could show you this stuff. And then I have a whole bunch of stuff during Lincoln's time where he talked about creating the legal state, enforcing the legal state on the inhabitants of the states, forcing them back into the Union against their will. And for a lot of people, it was the second time, maybe not in that specific generation, but for those lands, forced under the Constitution for the second time. Okay, so jurisdictional facts that do not bear on guilt. So this is what Ed Rivera was using, territorial jurisdiction, to help people win their cases because they didn't commit a crime on the federal lands. And when they didn't commit a crime on the federal lands, the federal government had no authority over them. They weren't in the jurisdiction. That's something else I'm looking at. And so that's why they created these corporations. And these corporations are all those people that have no authority, but they're trying to push themselves on us off the federal lands. So it's not just the Department of Justice that does this. They use the corporations to kind of bring people in off the federal lands, onto the federal lands, to stand for a crime that they're not actually guilty of because they didn't commit it on the federal lands. This is another one I'm looking at. This is Federalist Paper number 143. And it also says this, what I'm telling you. The problem is that it appears as though they intentionally wrote these to be confusing, their papers. Whether or not they are confusing is another matter. It may be that we just simply don't know how to read them because they were written in the 1700s and early 1800s. But if you put this together with the contract that was written between Texas and the federal government to cede lands to the federal government, it's written in much the same way as far as how confusing it is. So I'm going to show you hopefully a couple things that will help us understand. This is the same paper. Okay, but I've highlighted it already. Okay, so what he's saying, or what it appears to be that he's saying, is that they wanted to fix some of the problems that they thought were evident in the Articles of Confederation. It appears also through the various Federalist Papers that they never ended or repealed the Articles of Confederation. That they only wanted to enhance the Articles of Confederation. And in the preamble, it does say a more perfect union. And it appears as though they were creating a constitution that would be an amendment to the Articles of Confederation. And if that's true, then the Articles of Confederation still are good law. And they are still listed on the various government websites as being an organic law. So the Articles of Confederation, they say, had a few issues, and they just wanted to fix them by amending it with the Constitution. And so what they did was they allowed for the purchase of some lands for defense. And defense, to me, is all about what the Constitution is for. But they wanted to do it only on certain lands. And they wanted to cover all their bases for doing this. So after the state agreed, the legislator of the state agreed, then they had to get the people of the state to vote on it. And I know in Texas, there's some really fishy things about the voting records in Texas. For example, only 35 counties voted, and only a small portion of the people in those counties voted. And this was in 1846, whereas in 1850, the federal census was already 300,000. And if you can imagine how large Texas is, that's probably just a small portion of the actual number of people in Texas. And only 35 counties. I have copies of all the voting records for annexation that occurred in Texas, thanks to another friend who went to the library and got copies and gave me copies. So a lot of people didn't even vote. So how can you take something where a lot of people didn't even bother to vote? They didn't even think it was important enough to vote on this, or they were so appalled by it or the suggestion of it that they thought, well, I'm not voting on it. And in 1846, they already did have some census reports. And the census reports were probably just a fraction of what was actually in the state, of how many people were actually in the state. So how can you annex it and say that people voted for annexation when a really large portion of the state didn't even vote? Can that be considered annexation just because some people did vote and the majority of the people who did vote voted to annex? But that's what he's saying here. Madison is saying we've taken every precaution to make sure that the Constitution was legally enacted. We even asked all the people of the state to vote. Basically, you can go to Avalon and search Federalist Paper number 43, and this is in paragraph 2, where it's talking about exclusive legislation, because they needed the people in the whole state to agree to give some lands to the federal government. And once they received their lands to be annexed, they even asked the people, because there were people already living on those lands, they asked them to vote for annexation. So they're trying to say at every turn, well, we did everything possible that we could think of to make sure that this was legit. But it still was not legit, because they, of course, they don't talk about the things that made it not right for them to do. They skipped all that stuff. They skipped all the stuff they don't want to mention. I'd like to mention a book that I have that I bought. I think it was on Amazon. I'm not sure. It's by a guy named LaRue, Larue. He is some sort of attorney or instructor or something. Oh, he was a lawyer. Yeah, he was let's see, a constitutional attorney, I think, in Louisiana. And he thanks the people of Louisiana for teaching him the stuff that law school did not teach him. But he wrote this book called Constitutional Law as Fiction, Narrative and the Rhetoric of Authority. And he writes in here about how judicial opinions use a lot of fiction to get their point across and make people accept what they have written, okay? Getting people to believe things is so easy once you know how to do it, okay? There's a lot of ways to get people to see things your way, okay? And you got to know a little bit about who they are as a human being. Like, what is their archetype? What is their persona? What is their character? And once you can figure that out, and you can usually figure it out within a few minutes of talking to them, you can figure out how you need to talk to them and what you need to say and how to say it to get them to believe you. And acting as an authority is one of those ways. So in here, it uses fiction because it says we've used every imaginable objection, or they've declared that every imaginable objection seems to be obviated. Now, this is something that he teaches in his book, Constitutional Law as Fiction. Every. So they've exhausted every single thing they can imagine. Another fiction word, imagine, that they imagine it. So what are the things that they didn't imagine, that they didn't look at, or they aren't talking about? Every imaginable thing that people can come up with has been absolved. It's been obviated. We've already discussed it. We've already gone over it. There's no need to talk about it anymore. We've resolved it. So Madison was, these people are salespeople. They know what they're doing, okay? And I hate to say this to some people because they don't accept it. They just can't accept it. But the people, when you go to any place, you go to a meeting, church, a political rally, a YouTube channel. These people that have, people following them everywhere and calling them their leaders or their masters or their father, you know, this is the way they talk, and they're good at it. They can get people to follow them. They're salespeople. That's what they did when they went to um, write the Constitution. They knew they needed to sell it to the people, that the people had to accept it. So they write in such a way that when people believe it, when people see it and read it, they're reading a sales pitch. Sales pitches are fictions. We've exhausted ourselves taking every imaginable objection and tearing it apart, and we've gone to all of these great extents to make sure that we're doing this right. So there's no reason not to accept it now. Okay, so you find a lot of this stuff in these papers and in judicial opinions. The inhabitants will find sufficient documents. There's another fiction. It's up for me to decide whether the document is sufficient, not for you to tell me I will find it sufficient. So this is another fiction here. That way now I'm going to tell you what you need to do. You need to become a willing party in the session of these lands. You need to become willing to this, because you're going to find it sufficient. Now, I've studied hypnosis, and I was a certified hypnotist. And I have a lot of books on hypnosis, and I read a lot on just people, like Carl Jung and archetypes. And I've read Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature, Games People Play by Eric Bourne. This is what they say. This is what they teach. If I can get you to relax, and if I can make you believe that I'm an authority on something, you'll believe anything I tell you to believe. And that's what they're doing. That's what they have done. Okay, they're saying you will find this sufficient to become willing parties in secession. And these people at this time, they didn't have the internet. I was watching a lady, I've been watching a lady who talks about crimes, and she's, I don't know, I guess she's about 35 or so. And she's got almost 1 million followers on her crime channel, where she talks about criminals and stuff. And lately I found some of her stuff that goes back to the 70s, and she says that, in the 70s they didn't have the internet, and people were so much more gullible and naive back then. And you left your doors unlocked at night. You went, your kids, as soon as they turned 18, what'd they do? They went hitchhiking across the nation to see places or to visit friends or family. But that's when a lot of really weird crimes happened, because it was easy to find someone that you could manipulate. And there's a story of one guy who was able to manipulate his wife, their 5 children, a church family, a husband and wife, and their 3 daughters, into doing whatever he wanted. He talked the parents of the friends into letting him sleep in bed with their very young daughter, because it was part of his quote unquote therapy for having been abused as a child. And he ended up kidnapping this girl, running away with her, taking her to Mexico and marrying her. She was 12 years old. And she had, that thing where she relates to her abuser, her kidnapper, and believes that she's loving him and taking care of him. And then he did all these things, telling her aliens were going to come kill her family and all this stuff. And, he was able to do all this to her because it was just easy. So That was in the 1970s, because people just didn't, they weren't worldly, they didn't know any better. They were confined, in their knowledge and their experience. Imagine what it was like in 1790, 1780, where people, the only book they had was their Bible. And eventually they had newspapers, right? Pamphlets, some little pamphlets that were, a lot of them probably written by Benjamin Franklin, who signed the Constitution. I'm not even convinced that Patrick Henry was actually anti-constitutional as much as he could have been playing devil's advocate. I don't know. I have to go back and read all his speeches. But this is what they're doing, and I believe this is what they're doing. The inhabitants will find sufficient inducements of interest to become willing parties in the session. Naive and gullible people are hearing this and saying, oh, okay, so they've done all this work. Who am I? I don't know anything. I'm just a poor farmer traveling across the country. I've never read a book. I can't even read. Somebody else had to read this to me. So I can imagine how easy it is now, how easy it must have been back then. They will have their voice in the election of the government. If you know anything about people at all, you know that you can't get them all to agree on anything. You can't even get a small number of them to agree on anything. You can post a picture of a stick on Facebook and people will argue for months over what it actually is. They've done it. People will argue over it. Whether it's, jokingly or not, it still makes the point. People argue. They argue over things. And that's the problem with a democracy. And I'm not saying I'm against democracies. I'm saying that you have to understand the problem with democracy is that you can't get people to agree on things. And even in the records for cession or annexation in Texas, the papers, the voting records are, it's like there's hardly anything there. Hardly anybody even voted. So these are fictions. They will have their voice in the election of the government. Okay, just because I have my voice doesn't mean you're going to listen. And they didn't listen because most people didn't vote. Okay, and you're going to have your voice in the election, which is to exercise authority over them. But wait, there's more, because they're not saying that they're going to exercise authority over all the people. They're not saying that. They're saying that the inhabitants of the seated part of it to occur in the session will be derived from the whole people of the state in their adoption of the Constitution. So it's saying that when the federal government wanted Texas annexed, it wanted only some lands annexed. But it was going to ask the entire state to vote. Well, the entire state, first of all, didn't vote. Only a small portion of the people voted, and they voted for annexation. So it asked the entire people of the state to vote on whether or not these small areas and the people in these small areas could be annexed to the federal government. Meaning they had to give away these people's rights. That the entire state could vote away these people's rights to not be part of the union. And to bring these people in these federal lands under the authority of the Constitution, making them also federal taxpayers. Okay, that's what this is saying. But when you read this, it's kind of confusing. But let me tell you something. There's something called symbolic logic. And they give each word a symbol, like a mathematical symbol, and they can turn papers, legal papers, into mathematical equations. And so the mathematical equations appear to be true and correct, but when you read it and you just read it in English words, it's confusing. Let's look at let's look at something else real quick. I want to look at the contract between Texas and the federal government, and you'll see that it's written much in the same confusing sort of way. Historical documents. Annexation Agreement, 1845. Okay, so right here, resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled. Okay, so this United States of America appears to me to be America, but in Congress means as the United States, as the federal government. So the authority under the Articles of Confederation, under the Constitution, that Congress doth consent that the territory properly included within and rightfully belonging to the Republic of Texas, okay, that the territories that they ceded, okay, that's why this is confusing, because people read it and they say, oh, Texas, all of Texas ceded to the Union. That's not what it's saying. It's saying the territories rightfully within Texas are ceded. These small areas that they agreed on, okay, included within and rightfully belonging to the Republic of Texas, may be erected into a new state to be called the State of Texas with a Republican form of government. So these areas, the federal lands, all together create State of Texas. They erected State of Texas inside Texas. But they call it a state, but it's a dependent state. Okay, and I go over this in another video. And dependent and independent states is in Black's Law 9th. You can look those up in Black's Law 9th. Okay, and also look up federal citizen under citizens. To be adopted by the people of said republic. Which one? Because Texas was a republic, and the people inside these areas now are under the federal republic, because all the people voted to give up, to force them to give up their rights. And some people owned these lands. They had patents on the lands, and they've owned them for generations already. Because Texas became inhabited in, I think, the 1600s. Even though it wasn't called Texas, the land was inhabited. And you have to inhabit the land before you can create it into a state. So all this white area, all this area was an independent state. And it created a federal state inside of it. And these are the independent states. These federal areas combined are the independent state of Texas. I'm sorry, are the dependent state of Texas, because it's dependent on the federal government. If the federal government were ever to just fall apart, these areas would naturally go back to Texas. So state of Texas would disappear. And you can still say state of Texas, but it's depending on who's talking. Okay, so to be adopted by the people of said republic. Okay, so is it the Republic of Texas, or is it the Republican form of government that they created on those ceded lands? Okay, with the consent of the existing government. So if the federal government came in and all the lands were annexed and they created a new state called State of Texas, and the Capitol building was built after session, why did the Capitol building have on the rotunda floor Republic of Texas? So the Capitol in Austin was built after session, after Texas joined the Union, and after it ceded these small parts of lands. Then why on the rotunda floor does it say Republic of Texas? It doesn't say State of Texas. It says Republic of Texas on the Capitol building that was built after session. And if the federal government owned the entire state, all the land of Texas, why does it designate these areas as being federal lands? Wouldn't the whole state be federal lands? This is why they had to create corporations, because the corporations, being unconstitutional and without any authority, can work off federal lands. The IRS is not a federal entity, it's a corporation. So is the CDC. So is the FDA. Many other of the things, Department of Labor, OSHA. Okay. The same may be admitted as one of the states of the Union. So it's saying that Texas joined the Union. It gave up some lands. All the people of the state voted to have these people's rights taken away and making them federal citizens and federal taxpayers, because supposedly they get some sort of benefit for the government taking over their lands or building forts on their lands. I'm sure that they would disagree. So all of this is just real kind of crazy and iffy and sketchy. And I showed you how they used fiction in their writings, and how they don't say what you think they say. And you can read more about how fiction is written in LaRue's book, Constitutional Law as Fiction. And I have videos on that also. You can go and check out. And I have videos on a book called Uncommon Therapy, where a guy can put people into a trance real easy. And he's a doctor. He was a doctor. But he liked helping people by talking to them. And he could change their whole lives within a matter of weeks or months by putting them into a trance. Which don't get all, crazy about putting people in a trance. That's just wrong. It's so easy to put someone into a trance. It's so easy to do. If I just talk like this the whole video, I could put you into a trance so easily. And you'll believe everything I say. But, I don't do that because I think it's wrong. Unless you have someone's permission and they come to you and they ask you for help. Because you can help people by through hypnosis. Okay, so getting people to believe things is real easy, and they use these words like, we've done everything imaginable. Okay, so we've talked about that. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but let's go back to here. Proof of territorial jurisdiction. So what am I telling you? What's the point? The point is that the federal government has authority on the federal lands. Okay, and it's in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. And it's in a whole bunch of other places. A whole bunch of other places they've written this stuff down. Okay, yeah, you don't need to know that. So they have authority on the federal lands. Okay, and when you commit a crime on federal lands, the only thing they can do is issue a summons. And then the state authority has to bring you onto the federal lands to stand in a federal court for your crime that you committed on federal lands. If a military person commits a crime in the state land and runs back to post, the state can issue a summons to the federal government to have that person appear and stand for his crime. Just like if you flee to another country, they can only ask that other country to give you up. That's why Assange or Snowden have gone to certain countries, because there's no agreement between the United States and these other countries to bring people back, to force them to come back. Okay, so this is what this is saying, is that if you didn't commit a crime on the federal lands, then there's no authority for them to bring you into federal lands to serve for a crime. So what do? They create all these other places with all these other jurisdictions by way of corporations, or called instrumentalities of the federal government. And the agencies are given the freedom to create these instrumentalities. They go and they acquire by purchase or whatever a piece of land inside the state, and they build courthouses and they build buildings and all these other things, banks, IRS offices, all these other things, to which they don't actually have jurisdiction. They don't have exclusive legislative jurisdiction, meaning they really don't have any power or authority at all, because they're corporations. And in a recent video, Ron Paul says that the CDC is a nonprofit organization. And it showed that right on the front of their oh, here it is over here, right on the front of their webpage. Okay, so the CDC doesn't work on federal lands, or if they do work on federal lands, it's federal lands that don't have the jurisdiction to do anything. Okay, I just want to make sure that I'm really clear, and I think people watching this video already understand, but hopefully I can help people who don't understand. So my regular viewers, I'm trying to make more videos so that you can send them to your friends who are like, I just don't get it. I don't understand. Okay, so the federal government creates corporations. Their agencies are allowed to create corporations who can then purchase lands off the federal lands used for defense purposes, because that's the only place where they have exclusive jurisdiction, because it's military related. So all these things that are not military related are under these other jurisdictions, which basically they don't have any jurisdiction over anyone, because they were only constitutionally given federal jurisdiction over federal lands for military purposes, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, and the seat of government. So agencies create corporations called instrumentalities, and they go and they get land, and they use the federal government's pretended authority to make people do things. They create forms and they ask the federal government to approve the form for use. Once the form's approved, it's given an OMB number, an Office of Management and Budget number. Those numbers they mean different things for the forms, but the forms are actually called advertisements or solicitations. So they give them to you and they ask you to sign them. And once you sign them, now you're contracted to do business with a corporation established by Congress. And then they use the Department of Justice to push you into a federal prison or a state prison, state of the legal state prisons, because you went against the form that you signed. Now, we can go to reginfo.gov and we can look at some of these forms, and they say in the approval process whether or not they're for use by the federal government. And most of them, if not all of them, show no. So let's do that real quick just for fun. reginfo.gov. Okay. This is an official website of the United States government. Okay, let's search. And sometimes I forget how to do this. I don't know what's wrong with my computer. Let's refresh. Here we go. All. Let's just do all. Well, I don't know what's wrong with my computer. I've been having problems with this website because I don't know if they have my IP address or what, but I'm just going to get off here. I have some of these screenshots of their, here we go, pulled up. Okay, so reissuance and modification of nationwide permits. This is for the DOD, Department of Defense. Let's look at it. Federalism, no. This is what I want you to look at. Where almost every single thing they do, federalism, no. And federalism is defined as those things that are within the ideas of the Constitution. And you can find that in Executive Order 13132. It usually won't open for me here either. No, it won't open. But it probably will open on your computer. It won't open on mine. I do have a copy of this, but you can go back and look. Federalism, no, on almost every single one of the things that they do. Now, these are reissuance and modification of nationwide permits. For the Corps issues nationwide permits under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. Now, I'm not saying that these aren't good things. You know, these are good things, but should the federal government be forcing people like us who aren't doing anything wrong and using corporations to force us into doing things and telling us we have to sign their papers? I don't know what's wrong with this website. Look at that. Sheesh. Forcing us into like paying federal taxes when we were never actually intended to pay federal taxes. Their so-called legal authority. It didn't even come up all the way. Okay, so anyway, I'm just going to get out of here. Anyway, they are all established by Congress as an independent nonprofit organization or foundation or some other thing, like the Red Cross, but the Red Cross doesn't normally force people to do things. That's not part of its charter. That's not part of its agreement with the federal government. The Red Cross, to me, actually seems to do some really good things, but the CDC, it issues guidelines to be used off federal lands, which it has to be done by an organization or a corporation because the federal government has no authority to do it, and neither does the CDC. The federal government cannot give the CDC authority to do something that the federal government itself doesn't have. So I can't walk up in your house and tell you what to cook for dinner and how to make your bed and all that. I can't do that because you'd probably likely shoot me. Well, this is how the federal government gets around telling people what to do, by instituting these foundations, philanthropic organizations, which aren't really philanthropic because most of them are for profit, and doing all these things to get people to do things under the pretend idea, the fiction, just like the just like the various writings of like the founders in the Federalist Papers and case opinions by judges, the same way they write things the same way. They try to tell you, well, it's the law and you got to do this and you got to do that, and if you don't, you'll get in trouble and you'll be fined and you'll have to pay all this money and stuff. And they do fine people, and there's no way out. And there's no way out because you can fight it and fight it and fight it, and you'll lose because you signed the papers and you're going into their corporate courts, because there is no federal court for not complying with a corporation put together by an agency outside the Constitution. This is another form of a dependent state, which has no sovereignty. Dependent states have no sovereignty. We can find that in Black's Law 9th. And I have put that on my page so that people can. Black's Law 9th is by West Publishing. I'm not West Publishing. And I did upload the book. Dependent state. I try to post links to all these. Sometimes I have problems uploading, and then sometimes I just don't get to it and I have to come back and do it later. Dependent state. C, non-sovereign state under state. And I have my notes in here. So I made notes and then I uploaded it. So dependent state, C, non-sovereign state. A federal state. Non-sovereign state, a state that is a constituent part of a greater state that includes both it and the one or more others. So state of Texas is a legal state. It's a fictional state. It's an artificial entity created by the federal government. So the state of Texas is a dependent state. It has no sovereignty. So anything called state of Texas, state of Ohio, state of Oklahoma, when it comes from the federal government, is a dependent state, which has no sovereignty, which means it has no authority. It didn't get the power from us. It didn't get the power from the Constitution. It's all by contract. Okay? There's a pamphlet you can find on the internet called Exiting the Matrix, I think. I'm going to search my computer and see if I have it on here. And my computer is so slow, even though I have everything on hard drives. So, government organization and employees. State means a state. Okay, but it's talking about a legal state created by the federal government. And my research shows that this was done by Lincoln by force using the military. Okay, a federal agency means an executive agency or other agency of the United States, but does not include a member bank of the Federal Reserve System. Private corporation is not a member of the executive, is my note here. Okay, an individual who exercises a state or local officer or an employee, an individual who exercises no function in connection with that activity, or an individual employed by an educational or research institute, established agency or system, which is supported in part or in whole by a state or political subdivision, the District of Columbia, a recognized religious, philanthropic, or cultural organization. Okay, they have no authority. They're not considered okay, so a state or local officer or employee means also someone for philanthropic purposes. So, okay, so let's look at the CDC. Philanthropies. Okay, so the CDC can collaborate between the CDC Foundation helps the CDC serve and improve lives by unleashing the power of collaboration between CDC, philanthropies, corporations, organizations, individuals to protect the health, safety, security of America and the world. And they're considered state employees. Why are they considered state employees? Because they work for the federal government, the legal state. They're part of the legal state. Okay, they're part of the legal state that was forced inside the states, the independent states, by Lincoln during the Civil War or after the Civil War, by force using the military, which has no law enforcement capabilities, has no law enforcement authority. Okay, so I was searching for something called Exiting the Matrix. Here we go. I'll have to put this up. Doesn't actually look like I have it. But here is a paper. I wonder why I don't have it. That's weird because I've had it forever. I hate it when these things show up in something that I've already got open. So like here, it just shows up as a tab in something. So People's Awareness Coalition, Citizen as a Legal Fiction. Okay, so citizens of the United States, a native-born, foreign-born, or naturalized person who owes allegiance to the federal government and who's entitled to protection. I think it was Aristotle defined a citizen as a member of the legislature. Religious. Okay, so Rockefeller also has a philanthropic business called church organization or something like that, which he wants all churches to register with so that he can decide what the churches teach. And it doesn't matter what religion it is. It could be any religion. It could be Buddhist. Because he wants to have control. He wants to be able to tell people what they can study. the words "or by any territory or territorial possession of the United States" are admitted in view of the definition of state. So it's saying here that originally they had territory or territorial possession of the United States, and they changed it to state. And what are their possessions? All those things listed in the inventory report. Okay, so I wonder if this is starting to add up for anyone who was unsure before. Now, I have tons and tons of stuff during the Lincoln administration on the creation of the legal state. I don't actually know where I've hidden them right now. But the legal state goes back to, this idea of a legal state goes back a long ways. And really it means, to me, a business. The legal state of things, the business state of things, the money, finances. Okay, United States Senate to George Washington, December 9, 1973, as to obtain it by a declaration of the existing legal state of things. Like the State of the Union is the state of things, the business state of things of the states. And they're talking about the legal states, the legal states that they created for defense purposes, which then when the southern states seceded from the Union, Lincoln went and put them back into the Union by force by putting a legal state back into their state. To which then the federal government has expanded its jurisdiction, because everybody will always expand their own power, and force them back into the Union. So into the Union by force. Seems wrong, doesn't it? So you saw that where it says state, it's talking about territorial or territorial possession of the United States. They took it out and they're using the word state. So that's pretty profound right there. So whenever they use state, they're talking about a federal territory or territorial possession. So it's talking about really the legal state. And the places mentioned in the inventory report under different jurisdictions, which basically have no authority. None of these jurisdictions gave the federal government authority over the people not on federal lands. None of them did. It gives them authority over themselves, but they keep expanding and expanding and expanding. Eventually they're, like they've gone overseas and tried to get other countries by force to use the dollar. Okay, that's an expansion of jurisdiction. The federal government was never given authority to do that. As a matter of fact, the Constitution uses the word defense for one, and defense means to fortify, which is what they're doing in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, and to use gold and silver or specie, not dollar. Dollar's created by a corporation under the executive offices. Okay, to expand its jurisdiction, to make you subject to it, to trick you, to deceive you, to make you think that it's part of a legal state, which a legal state is a fiction. It's just for business, to bring you in under the business, to basically siphon money off of you. Siphon your money, siphon your land, siphon your rights. So, yeah, so look up DOJ CRM 666, where the DOJ acknowledges that it has no authority off of federal lands. And they say, well, there's this idea that the federal government has authority everywhere, and we don't know where it came from or how they're doing it or anything like that. So they play stupid. But they're the ones instituting all these corporations and giving them the authority to do these things. Let me show you something else the Constitution says that they have to take an oath to. Protect each of them against invasion. To every state of this union. So is it talking about the legal state here or the actual state? I don't know, but the actual state had to join the union. That doesn't mean it gave up all the land. So, or to a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion. So is it just protecting itself, or is it protecting the actual states? Because they have invaded our states with their legal state, their fictions, their corporations. And they're doing it, and then they're acting like, well, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what the corporations we created are doing. We don't know why they're doing it. We don't know why they're forcing you to pay taxes. And well, it looks like a private contract, even though they're using federal forms. And so we can't do anything about it because we can't interfere with private contracts. And it's all bullshit. It's all lies. It's all deceit. And I showed you the military manual, one of them at least, that talks about deceitful practices. These deceitful practices have gone on for thousands of years. Since man was able to understand that he had to take care of his own, people have been using deceitful practices to get what they want. Okay, so this is good to read. This was really what this was about, and how the courts that they're bringing you into are not federal courts. They're courts under these various titles that are not laws. So any title without an asterisk is not a law, and many of them are even not even with the ones with an asterisk, some of them are not law. They have no positive law citation. So these are where the corporations come in to do the things, to help do the things that are made positive. So under Title 5 for government organization and employees, where it talks about in some of these areas OSHA laws and labor laws, where these are positive paying allowances. So how do they pay people? Well, they got to institute a bank, but a bank is not in the Constitution, so it's not a positive law. But the banks are supposed to work to do things for the employees of the federal government. Insurance and annuities, the criminal courts, and somewhere in here they have OSHA and they have Department of Labor. So these titles that are not positive are supposed to help administer the actual laws for the federal people on the federal lands. But when they instituted them, they started coming off of their legal states, outside of their legal states, and having us all claim to be part of it by claiming to be federal citizens, which are citizens of the United States. Okay, and we're not actually citizens of the United States. We're inhabitants of the states. And this has been 200 years, more than 200 years of just playing games and making things more and more vague and doing more and more deceitful practices. Every time we have a new Congress, every time we have a new president, they do things, they put a different spin on things. They write things differently. Like this, text contains those laws in effect on June 11th, 2021. So they're constantly changing these things. The president issues executive orders, different papers, the Congress passes laws, and so they have to change all these. They have to update them. And they tend to make them more and more and more vague so that you don't understand what it's saying. which is exactly what they did here when they said state means territory or territorial possession of the United States. And the United States are the federal lands for federal purposes. You know, the federal government does not have authority over all the people everywhere all the time. It has authority over its legal states, its corporations, its federal lands, and even then, the amount of power they have on those lands varies depending on what they're using it for. And the only place they have all power are the lands used for defense purposes, for building forts. Okay, and it's in a bowl. It's to itself. It's by itself. Okay, so that's this video for territorial jurisdiction and corporations and that, and how they're scamming us and stealing from us. Taxation is theft. They don't say that just to be funny or clever. They say it because it's actually theft, because they have no authority to tax your money, your income. The sooner people wake up and start going back to gold and silver and realizing that the federal government has instituted these corporations to do things outside of the Constitution, and they're playing stupid all the while these corporations are raping us. They're raping us of our children, our income, our land, which is what Ron Paul's been saying for a long time now. Then maybe the sooner we can regain control and actually have true freedom. I mean, if you think you have freedom now, just wait. If we can regain control of this country, we can get some real freedom. Okay, so please like, share, and subscribe. And I appreciate everyone who watches the video and gives a thumbs up. It helps with analytics and gets the word out. The whole purpose of this is to help us understand the state of things and regain our freedom. If not for us, then at least for our children. Maybe they can live a happier life than the one we have lived. And to also inform you. So if you choose not to do anything, at least you know what's going on and you can start thinking about things from a different perspective. Okay, so like, share, subscribe, and I'll see y'all in the next video.